The book is about the Middle East, but it's also about Washington in the Middle East. And it's about the way in which Washington responds and the way in which Washington tries to make policy and tries to make sense of very complicated things. And so the discourse in Washington about Libya was, wow, Libya is in the best position to become a democracy. Because when Gaddafi was killed, was driven from Tripoli and Gaddafi was killed, he left nothing behind. So Libyans had a blank slate to have this kind of perfect democratic experiment, whereas Egyptians would have to contend with the army, the senior bureaucracy, the judiciary. All of them were from the Mubarak era. Tunisians would have to struggle with the leftovers of the Ben Ali. But Libya was somehow going to make that transition relatively easy. These were the kinds of things that I think people in the policy community desperately wanted to believe. No one knew much about Libya. Think about Libya up until around this time, or the mid-2000s. It was a black box. There were no Americans there. Gaddafi and the United States had extraordinarily difficult relations. It was under sanction through most of the 1980s. We had military conflicts with the Libyans in the 1980s. And Libya had only recently opened up. What did we really actually know that much about Libya? Yet we were prepared to believe certain things. And this kind of fashioned our approach. And of course, our frame was the revolutions in Eastern and Central Europe in the late 1980s. So Washington came together. This was a moment, and it came from a good place. We had saved the world from Nazism. We had saved the world from Soviet communism. Now we were going to help make democracy in the Middle East, and Washington came together with a flurry of activity, tremendous rate of production of knowledge and analysis about what was happening and what the United States should do. But if you take all of the things that were said and written at the time, and Jim is referencing a meeting that I went to in spring of 2011 at the Brookings Institution, in which all the kind of people in the Middle East watching world in Washington were going to get together and we're going to have this big discussion, and it was going to result in a book about what the United States should do in the new Middle East. And the stuff that came out of this meeting and subsequently was, pardon me, but lame blandishment on top of lame blandishment. And the argument that I make in the book is that this isn't because people in Washington are stupid. You have enormously accomplished people with tremendous experience in the region, government experience. That wasn't really the problem, that we were dealing with dumb people. It's the nature of the problem itself. What diplomatic tools does the United States have to bring to bear to influence politics in a country where people define their struggles in essentially existential terms? What is it that the President of the United States can do constructively to make Egypt a democracy, or Egypt less unstable, or make Libya not fragmented? These are conflicts that are at the very root of societies that are asking kind of basic questions about their identity, about what kind of governments they want, what kind of societies they want. And when the stakes are so high, outsiders have very, very little ability to influence how politics works. And there's this certain conceit in Washington, because we have all of this power, that we can somehow leverage that power into getting people. And it's an uncomfortable view, because it suggests that people in the region don't have their own ability to calculate their own interests and what their politics on the ground is, and that we can somehow shape their behavior by either making statements or withholding aid or adding aid. When I think this entire episode proves that, at least when it comes to these kinds of conflicts, these kinds of existential conflicts about what it means to be Egyptian, or what Libyanness even means at this point, what kind of societies these people in these countries that are experiencing these kinds of uprisings and conflict want, that there's not a lot that the United States can do. But nevertheless, Washington gets all geared up to help. One more anecdote on this. I remember, I guess it was probably a year after this meeting at the Brookings Institution, and I went to a meeting at the State Department. I got asked to go, and listened to a presentation from folks at the State Department about what big idea they had for the Middle East. And I'm sitting there, it wasn't a very big group, I'm sitting there, and I'm uncharacteristically quiet throughout this meeting. And it dawns on me that what they're proposing, it was some sort of region-wide bank that will invest in infrastructure and social development, and I couldn't quite get my arms around exactly what they were doing, but it had echoes and things that people had proposed before. And finally it dawned on me, this really didn't have that much to do with the Middle East or what was needed in the Middle East. It had to do with what we call in Washington the interagency process. Who got the money to do what, and justifying one's existence for members of Congress who are appropriating this money. And so this is the kind of thing that I think, on the outside, if you're not in the Beltway and you're not part of this world, and you scratch your head and you say, what are we doing? I think is often lost, and that's why I spend a lot of time talking about this kind of thing.